For many years, I've wondered, what is a GT710 capable of when you push it to its limits? To answer that question, we have to find out what the limit is. Let's talk about that. This is a long overdue project. It started a rather distant 8 years ago, in February of 2017. At least, that's when I started to gather the materials for it. Constructing the actual water block itself wouldn't begin until March of 2018. So much time has passed since then that I can't recall why there was such a delay, and sadly, any potentially related Discord messages and Snapchat videos from the time didn't give me any clues. Back when I set out to create this abomination, it would have been unique, but since then others have given it a go. Which isn't surprising, but this project is too far along to just give up on now, so I'm going to finish it my way. That being said, doing it my way is why it looks like, that. When I started this project, I wasn't aware that universal water blocks existed for cheap, so I asked my grandpa for help chopping up the stock heatsink and turning it into something that would plausibly work. But at the end of the day, who cares that this thing will probably be horrifyingly inefficient? I started this project in the first place because it's silly. The GT710 is a terrible GPU. Yeah, it's technically a graphics card, but does it really deserve that title? I guess at least it isn't an 8400. Anyways, if nothing else, it seems the GT710 is at least a great overclocker. And a few people online have attempted so with fairly successful results. With all of that being said, for the last 8 years, I haven't been able to get this question off my mind. What can this card achieve when not bound by an air cooler's thermal limit? So that's what we're going to attempt to answer today. Now, as for the spectacularly engineered build, at the bottom of the loop sits the reservoir, a plastic tub I partially filled with distilled water that I then froze, finally adding refrigerated water on top of that to complete it. To carry this water upwards, we have a fish tank pump that I bought off eBay. I think it was around $7 at the time. I used Thermaltake V-Tuber 4T for the loop's tubing. As for the heatsink, I just reused the stock one. It's since been cut up, epoxied, and had some copper pipes added to, hopefully, allow water to flow directly on top of the GPU die. Now, because of the way my grandpa and I designed this back then, the copper plate keeps the whole heatsink suspended a few millimeters higher than it did stock, so I have to be careful not to over-torque the screws holding it on, or I may damage the PCB. And the thing that ties it all together is my excellent choice of thermal compound. I did countless hours of research. And decided on the Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut Extreme, touted for its exceptional heat transfer ability when doing extreme overclocking. With the card and its loop now figured out, we need a donor PC to test it in, because I am not risking this in my personal rig. And not 24 hours before testing this monster of a card, I met with a Facebook Marketplace seller getting rid of a respectable machine manufactured by ZT Systems for just $30. It boasts a Sandy Bridge i7 2600 and 16GB of DDR3 memory. I had originally bought a Dell Inspiron as my test bench, but, well, that's a story for another video. In any case, I decided on using this PC as the test bench because it's powerful enough that we guarantee there's no bottleneck to limit the GPU's performance. This is actually a really solid computer on its own for being a pre-built, as it's more along the lines of a system builder style of computer, so thankfully it has a non-proprietary motherboard with an unrestricted BIOS, unlike what you'd find in something like an HP, for example. Oh yes, how could I forget? You probably thought to yourself after looking at the skyscraper of a water block, how is that supposed to fit into the case? Well, it isn't. I built a stand and bought a PCIe riser. Not only does this allow it to actually function, but it also keeps it far away from the essential components when the water block leaks. That way, if there is any water damage, all that's lost is the GT710, which is arguably doing the world a favor. Another question you might be asking, or one I had to ask myself at least, where the hell do we set this all up? I'm surely not doing it in the house, since there's a risk of water spilling on either carpet or hardwood depending on where it's set up. Which brings us to the only clear option. This is the ultimate open air setup, given we're right next to a huge door that leads outside, allowing for potentially even lower temperatures since there's no possibility of trapping any heat. With our magnum opus of GT710s complete after all these years, as well as the test bench staged, it's finally time to run some thermal and frame rate benchmarks. This test could get awkward, given I don't have a typical radiator to cool down the water, and am instead using an unproven ice block to act the part. If the water heats up too much, I'll eventually have to change it out, so I have another jug of distilled water in the fridge on standby just in case. With the physical aspects of the project thoroughly explained, it's now time to discuss testing criteria. First, I'll let Unigine Heaven run for long enough that the card's temperature can plateau under 100% load while only being passively cooled. After that's done, I'll turn on the pump, let it sit a few minutes at idle, and run the benchmark again to see if there's any difference. Afterwards, I'll leave the pump on to let the water try and cool down the heatsink as much as possible before overclocking. Even though water cooling the GT710 is a pretty key part of this video, I only need one pass of each thermal test to figure out if we're getting a significant enough boost in cooling power to apply a worthwhile overclock on both the core and memory. At the end of the day, the point here is to use water cooling as a means to take this thing's speeds where no GT710 has ever gone before, stability be damned. At some point, any card has a limit where it starts to artifact or thermal throttle, and my hope is that cooling it to an extreme will allow us to stretch that limit. So without further ado, I'll let past me, who did the actual testing, take over. Alright, so now I've been running this benchmark for about 5 minutes, just to let the card kind of plateau at whatever temperature it was going to peak at. It's sitting around 66 to 67, no, 68 now. Yeah, so it just keeps climbing. So I'm going to shut the benchmark down, let the card cool off, and then start running the water to see if we get a temperature change. And the moment we've all waited for. The pump being switched on for a live test for the first time. Alright, so I didn't have my camera pointed at the screen when I did it, but as soon as I turned it on, it dropped 17 Celsius. That tick that you see there, that uptick, that's 36 degrees, and now it's at 18. It just keeps dropping. I didn't expect it to work so fast. Alright, so with the water on, I've been running this benchmark for a good 10 minutes now, and it will not touch above 36 Celsius. So we've nearly halved the load temperature without the water cooler. This is a great result to see. I think what I'm going to do is I am going to benchmark it stock, see what score I get in Unigine, and then I am going to overclock this thing as much as humanly possible, and then run another score or another benchmark in Unigine, see what score I get, average FPS, all that, because I have limited time and I really don't want to sit here all day benchmarking games stock and overclocked. So we're just going to push this thing to its limit, fry the card, and call it a day. Alright, so I went ahead and downloaded NVIDIA Inspector because it is a lot less restrictive than MSI Afterburner, because with MSI Afterburner and this card, I can't adjust the voltage, and at some point I'm going to need to. But otherwise, I'm just going to absolutely demolish this card. You can see up in the top left there, we're sitting already at a gigahertz on the memory and a gigahertz on the core. Well, 1045 megahertz, but still. So we're just going to keep going from there. All right, I have applied plus 300 megahertz to both. So we're at 1.2 gigahertz on the core, 1.2 gigahertz on the memory. The benchmark froze there for a moment. I wonder if we're going to start getting some stability issues at this speed. But we're just going to keep going until the display driver crashes. It looks like we are not far from that point, though.
Oh, fuck. It doesn't like that.
I let it sit frozen here for about 20 seconds, but this is where we saw the first problem of the day.
Alright, so obviously you shouldn't mess with your core clocks that heavily without messing with voltage too. I tried to put it up to plus 360 megahertz on both the core and the memory, and it just blue screened, so we'll be back in a moment.
It's me from the future again. On the day that I did the testing, I did most of the overclocking after this off camera because it was in my workspace and I just wanted to deal with it on my own. This card hates overclocking, period. I tried all manner of different voltages. I tried different clocks. I tried just doing the core, just doing the memory. I just lost the silicone lottery. And I mean, getting a GT710 in the first place is losing the silicone lottery, but this card does not like overclocking. So in that regard, I would call this a failure. The highest quote-unquote stable clock I managed was plus 320 on both core and memory, which is decent, but I had really hoped for more. As for the two sets of benchmarks, with the card completely stock, we got an average FPS of 59.6 and a score of 1501. With the card overclocked to 1254 MHz on the core and 1200 MHz on the memory, we got an average FPS of 82.8 and a score of 2086. Finally getting into the gaming benchmarks, starting with Unturned, and this is where you'll see why I said it was only quote-unquote stable. Certain objects, mostly trees, were stretched out and going up into the sky. I've never seen this before. It's kind of crazy that the GPU is running this unstable. Other than that, though, the game was playable. Average of 79 frames per second. Not bad. All lowest settings, of course. And side note, you'll probably know this up in the top left there, that the clock speeds are a little bit faster than the final Unigine Heaven benchmark. I ran that benchmark with a plus 300 clock on the core and memory, and for gaming, I finally bumped it up that extra 20. Next up, we have Black Ops 1, which was mostly playable. This game had the exact same issue that Unturned did, where certain objects were stretched out, but on this particular recording, I had to do it twice. It didn't show up. I decided to give the card something easy to run, so here's Left 4 Dead 2 at ultra settings, averaging 50 FPS. Not bad, I'd call that playable. This game was also having the same issue where objects were stretched out, and also it would not launch with the overclock I had on the card, so I had to dial it back by 150 megahertz on both the memory and core, and then when I was in the game, I could put it back to that plus 320 that we've been running with. And rounding it off with our fourth and final game, we have Risk of Rain 2. The first stage was playable at 30 FPS average, which means that when you see any real gameplay, it's going to fail. And by all means, the card did fail on this, because this was the only game that just outright crashed. At the end of this recording, you'll see it freezes up and it's just done. This game, of course, had the exact same problem that every other game did, where a lot of objects were just stretched out across the screen. And so, with the benchmarks out of the way, we finally reach our conclusion. This project was equal parts fun and frustrating. Frustrating just because I had really hoped for better results than what I got. I can't complain, because at the end of the day, it was still a decent overclock. Definitely worse than both David Does Tech and Random Gaming in HDs, but the thing that I did get was better temperatures than both of them. I saw a lowest of 13 Celsius, and by the way, that is sub-ambient temperature. The day that I tested this card, it was 62 degrees out, and 13 Celsius equals out to 55 Fahrenheit. So that in itself is impressive. I am really happy with the cooling aspect of this, just not the overclocking aspect, but at the end of the day, part of it succeeded, I had some fun with it, and I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. Also, quick note, it did manage to run for a good 3 hours without any issues, so that ice block did actually do a good job of keeping it cool. Anyways, that's it. I'm sure you can tell that I'm not great at speaking unscripted, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time. More tech content coming in the near future.
Зерна упали в землю, зерна просят дождя. Им нужен дождь, разрежь мою грудь, посмотри мне внутрь, ты увидишь, там все горит огнем. Через день будет поздно, через час будет поздно, через миг будет уже не встать. Если к дверям не подходят ключи, вышиби двери плечом. Мама, мы все тяжело больны, мама, я знаю, мы все сошли с ума.
Hello. If you're still watching, then you've made it to the post-credit scene where we're going to see if the GT710 survived being bent, being frozen, being smashed with a hammer out of the ice block, being thrown out of a car, and being put in a river. I washed it with soap and water the other day just to get any like river gunk off, and it's been drying for over 24 hours, so now we're going to see if it shows video. All right, look at that. So if you need a very resilient video card that for some reason you just want to abuse, then the GT710 is it. Thanks for watching.